Hi, how's it going? I hope that you're having a nice day wherever you are and whoever you are and whatever you're doing. I found this video that you're looking at now on my computer, and it's of an old drawing, but I hadn't actually turned it into a time lapse yet, so here you go. I'm just going to throw it out there, and I hope you enjoy it. Anyway, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about some sort of concepts and ideas and philosophical shit I've been struggling with lately. And I'm going to warn you, it's going to be pretty dense and boring and pretentious at times. But if you enjoy that kind of shit, listen on. And I might not do the very best job at explaining them. So I'll leave some reference material or some stuff, names of authors and books and shit in the description in case you want to look more into any of this stuff, in case you are interested. So anyway, without further ado, uh, about a year and a half ago, maybe a bit more, while I was in Germany, I made a friend who's this Portuguese guy. Who's really cool into drugs. We go to techno clubs and hang out, and he studied philosophy, so I'd ask him a lot of questions about philosophy, and we'd have these interesting conversations about the nature of reality, and he kind of got me interested in the subject and recommended I look into the Stoics, which are a group of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers who started this sort of school of thought about how you should conduct yourself in everyday life and ethics and stuff, and how to sort of be free, which is an interesting idea. There's a bunch of them, and I think the school was started by this guy called Zeno. But the two main ones you'll hear about and read about, and read their work when you look into it, are Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius, who were kind of the two most influential ones, I think. Seneca also played a really big role. But Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus are definitely like the two more interesting ones and more widely known ones. Um, they're widely known for different reasons. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, so that was kind of his claim to fame. But not only was he a Roman emperor, but he actually like conducted himself in a sort of civil and reasonable way. He wasn't all about like debauchery and drugs and fucking like the other ones were. um, it's hard to imagine, but he was like the most powerful person in like the known world. Everything that like the Romans knew existed, he had power over basically. So imagine being in that position where you can have literally anything you want. No rules apply to you. You're at the head of the most powerful nation in the world, and you find a way to conduct yourself rightly and correctly. So that's why he's kind of famous. And then the other one, Epictetus, was this guy who was a slave. And then so yeah, I mean, first off, imagine being a fucking slave. That's insane. And he was freed by his master. I can't remember why he was freed, but he was freed. And then once became a free man, he started his own sort of school of philosophy, and became a philosopher, which is also uh, an insanely, I don't know, interesting vantage point. You have like these two, the person at the top, the very peak of power, and the person at the very bottom of the, um, power food chain, as it were. And they both are made equal, sort of, in philosophy at least. So those are the main guys you read about, and when you do read about them, you'll learn a little bit about what Stoicism is and what these ideas are. And Stoicism is, I guess it's founded around the central belief that there are two types of things in this life: things that you can control and things that you cannot control. Things that you cannot control would be, for example, worldly possessions, so money, clothes, anything that you possess, because it can be stolen and taken away. Um, Interestingly enough, they also consider your body as something that you possess, because someone could come and chop off your arm, and then you don't have an arm anymore. You can't control whether you have one or not, which is a very extreme example of a possession, but a possession nonetheless, is your own body, which I always found interesting. But also something else that you can't control is like the opinions of others. So I guess fame or reputation or anything along that line. Anything that other people do and say you cannot control. And the list goes on and on for things that you cannot control. But things that you can control are mainly two, and that is your own opinions and your own actions. So, what Stoicism tells you to do is focus solely on the things that you can control, and not only focus on the things that you can control, but make a conscious decision to only derive happiness and satisfaction from the things that you can control. Or I guess not interact emotionally with the things that you cannot control. For example, if your metric for happiness is having a lot of money, for example, so you're happy if you, I don't know, made $1,000 this week or this month or whatever it is, and then you get fired from your job, you'll be sad and you'll be frustrated and you'll be angry because you're no longer making money. So your happiness can be taken away from somebody, in this case your boss. That is to say, your boss has power over you because he has something that makes you happy and on which your happiness depends. Whereas if you derive happiness only from doing the right thing and you get fired from your job, then you just don't care because that's not something that affects you emotionally. The only thing that would affect you emotionally would be, for instance, I don't know, something, I can't think of a good example, but like, I don't know, helping an old lady cross the street, or being, kind to your friends, or enduring everyday life. Those sort of things would just make you happy. So in the second example, nobody has power over your happiness. And you can come up with a lot of examples. For instance, those people who are always trying to be in like a committed relationship, or are always looking to be in love with someone, and just want to devote themselves to their partner. Well, they're putting their happiness and fulfillment in the hands of that other person, being completely enamored with this person and always trying to make them happy. If they become unhappy or angry with you, then you would become naturally sort of anxious and depressed, and you just feel like shit. So you'd be putting all of your positive emotions in the hands of this person, and your positive emotions would depend on the opinions of that person. So how you feel is no longer in your control. And that isn't to say that you can't enjoy your relationships and stuff. They do always talk about like, enjoying the presence of people while you have them, but sort of mentally preparing yourself for when you do lose them, in a way, I guess. So, in synthesis, Stoicism is all about deriving happiness from the things that you can control and being indifferent towards the things you cannot control. That's not to say that this is the only thing that you'll learn by reading about Stoicism, and it's not to say that it's the only thing that they think about and talk about. There's a lot of lessons and interesting things to be gleaned from Stoicism as a whole, but it is the central pillar on which the rest of the school of thought is built, as it were, and without it, the ideology would crumble. So anyway, time goes by, and I'm getting really into Stoicism, learning everything there is to know, listening to all the audiobooks I could find on it, by the different authors and philosophers and stuff, and trying to incorporate it in my own life. And I was definitely finding it useful. It gave me a new perspective and helped me realize a little bit what was important and what wasn't, and how I was sort of attaching myself emotionally to shit I couldn't control. I was still obviously, getting excited and happy and sad when shit happened to me, because it's not that easy to simply, detach yourself from, shit that happens to you. But, it was definitely helping out, and I was learning a lot, and I was having fun doing it too. I remember I had this little routine where I'd listen to Stoicism on the way to boxing, and then I'd do my boxing class and shit, and then I'd listen to Stoicism on the way back, and do like push-ups and shit, and take a cold shower while listening to Epictetus. And that felt badass and awesome. But it all came crashing down when I read The Big Picture by Carroll, which is another book that my Portuguese friend recommended to me. The Big Picture is a super long and dense, but simultaneously well-worded and interesting book about the nature of reality, quantum physics, the nature of reason, how we figure shit out, how we know stuff, a whole bunch of, just a whole fucking row of physical phenomenon and interesting ideas and theories about reality, and stuff. Really way too much to get into in this video, and honestly I don't understand a lot of it because it's just complicating shit, even though it's explained for people that don't know fundamental, all the physics stuff they're talking about. It's explained for everyday people like you and me, it's still super fucking complicated, like convoluted and complicating. One example of how mind-boggling and hard to wrap your head around some of the stuff they were talking about in this book would be that, for example, there's this one chapter where they were talking about quantum mechanics, and they were specifically saying that like an atom, right, when you're not observing it, it behaves like a wave function, and when you observe it, it's in a fixed spot, right? So behaving like a wave function means that there's like a cloud of probabilities where each point has a certain probability of how likely it is that the atom will be found or not be found there, where the probabilities are like sort of denser and of higher probability near the center and of lesser probability near the edges, right? But when you observe it, you'll see it in one point. And what was crazy is that we're saying that what's real isn't the atom in a single point. That is to say, there is no atom in a single point. What's real is the cloud of probability itself. So reality isn't, an atom in a spot. It's the probability, it's that cloud of probabilities. That's reality, which I still don't understand. And the reason that when you observe the atom, you see it in a single spot is because you're also part of that, wave function. You're made up by atoms, which are also described by clouds of probabilities. So it would be impossible for you to actually see the cloud of I don't. The point is, I don't fucking understand this type of shit, right? But that's some of the stuff that we're talking about. So one of the things that I did actually understand from the book is this thought experiment commonly referred to as Laplace's demon. Laplace's demon was a thought experiment invented by this guy called Pierre-Simon Laplace in 1814. And it's a thought experiment wherein you imagine a being with infinite computational power. That is to say, a being that could resolve any equation, solve any mathematical problem, and so on and so forth. Then you tell this being the exact state, position, and location of every single particle in the universe. That is to say, this being would now know the position of every single atom, which way it's spinning, how many electrons it has, and so on and so forth. It then follows that this being would be able to calculate the exact state of the universe during any single point in time. That is to say, it could tell you what you're going to be thinking in 7 days at 2:30. Or it could tell you what your grandmother had for breakfast on the day she got married. Or it could tell you, what Christopher Columbus was thinking about on the last day of his life. The point is, you could tell you anything you wanted to know about any single point in history, because you could calculate the motion of these atoms and how they would bump into each other and how they would clump together and how they would roll around with gravity and shit. And through that could know exactly how the universe was at any point of time. What this means then is that we would live in a deterministic universe. That is to say that we live in a deterministic universe, and it's one of the most important arguments for determinism. And what determinism is the idea that everything that has happened, is happening, and will happen is just a natural chain reaction or result of the state of the universe during the Big Bang. So if you think about it for a bit, it's pretty easy to see how living in a deterministic universe would pose gigantic problems for a philosophy like stoicism that leans so heavily on the assumption that there's free will, that you have a will that's unimpeded by nature, that you can make your own choices. And obviously in a deterministic universe, people still make choices. I wake up in the morning, I still have to choose what to eat or what to drink or what I'm going to do in my day. It's just that my choices can be or could be determined by looking at the exact state of the universe right now. I don't know what those choices are going to be, but in a way they've already been made, regardless of whether I know what they are or not. And there's nothing I can do to change what those choices will be. But I still experience choosing. So, when I first learned that physicists believe that we live in a universe whose future and past states can be determined by looking at its present state, um, I obviously freaked out and had several panic attacks, and started questioning a lot of things about my own thoughts. And uh, every time I get high, I'd get really paranoid about what I was thinking and how I couldn't control what I was thinking or what I was doing, or anything really. Because that's what determinism means, is that you don't have control over anything. You don't even truly have control over yourself. But it's obviously super impractical to a live in a way in which, for every single thing you do or action you take, you remember that you don't actually have control over the action. Really, the only practical way is to live is assuming that we have a free will. Because of this, I came to the conclusion that Stoicism is still useful, but I only came to this conclusion after a lot of thought, because in the beginning I was really disappointed and sort of frustrated. I felt like I'd wasted all my time learning Stoicism, because if you have a philosophy which is all about self-discipline, self-mastery, and self-control, and then it turns out that you only have the illusion of self-control and that really you can't control anything at all, then obviously one would think that that system of belief would sort of crumble in around itself, as it were, if the central pillar was a false assumption. I guess the good news is that that illusion of self control and free will is so complete and so encompassing, in your everyday life. It's impossible to see the grand design, as it were, even though it's not a design, it's just a chaotic jumble. What would you call that? I guess it's impossible to see um, the grand chain reaction of the universe. Um, you're just completely immersed in the illusion of self control. So, because of that, Stoicism is quote unquote useful, I think. And self mastery in general is useful. I think it's pretty common knowledge that if you try to improve as a person and get better, um, as who you are at what you do, how you interact with people, then you'll lead a overall happier and more fulfilling life. The interesting thing about this dilemma, I think, is that if you look at it from a completely rational point of view, you'll say, all right, well, looking at all these examples of people who have lived, usually the people who choose to become better at something, um, or in general. And there is something to be said for just going batshit crazy and just doing all the drugs and dying homeless under a bridge. I'm sure that there've been people, some Diogenes type like figures who've been happy that way, but for the most part, um, I think that self improvement leads overall in the end to more happiness. So you think about that, you think, all right, I'll choose then to improve. The problem then arises that it's impossible to choose anything, at least in our traditional idea of what it means to choose something. For us, a choice means you have multiple possibilities and you decide on one that looks nice, and you're like, all right, I'll go with that one, and then you have that one instead of the other ones. But in reality, there's only ever one choice, and that's the choice that you're going to make. Um, Good news is that you don't know what choice you're going to make. So you still experience choosing, regardless of whether or not there is actually a choice being made. There's a really good quote from uh, The Big Picture by Carroll, which says, humans can make choices even if for the atoms of which they are composed, the concept of choice does not exist. That's my favorite quote from the book, and it's one that gives me hope because it entails that in a weird way, two things are true at the same time. Um, on one level, you're experiencing reality and making choices, and on a larger sort of more uh, a level closer to reality, there's particles moving around in the void, obeying the laws of physics, and there are no choices. But both those things are sort of equally true. It's kind of like, imagine being in the passenger seat of a car and being driven to a destination. But you don't actually know that you're in the passenger seat. You think that you're in the driver's seat, and you experience driving yourself to your destination. So, for you, the experience of driving yourself to your destination is what's real. But for the rest of the universe, what's real is that you're being driven to your destination. So one thing I got to wondering while on copious amounts of psychedelic drugs, when I was sort of pondering this idea of two things being true at the same time, was how far does that concept go? You know, if you have someone who's devoutly religious and truly believes in a omnipotent divine being, then wouldn't God for that person be real, at least on their level of experience? And if you take it a step further and take it out of the singular, you know, one person believes that they have free will, um, and everybody else from the human race believes that they have free will. So for the human race, free will exists. Well, if one person has, this belief in God, for them, God is true on their level of experience. And if you have other people who believe in the same God, then for that group of people, that church, God would be real on their sort of group level of experience. And I don't know, it was a weird thing to think about because you kind of realize that your beliefs, in a way, maybe don't create your reality, but they definitely do shape your reality to a great extent. A real stupid example I came up with was if you have two guys and they're both trying to get laid, and guy A believes that he's super confident and good with women, and guy B believes that, he's super socially awkward and just bad at interacting with people, then guy A is going to go out and, probably ask girls for numbers or do or go to parties and interact with women, and eventually he will succeed and get some pussy. Whereas guy B, who believes he's awkward and believes he's not confident, will do the opposite. He'll stay home, he won't talk to people or meet people's eyes when he goes out in public, and the only thing changing, well, I guess there's other factors like genetics and shit, right? But the main thing changing both of these people's behaviors is their beliefs. Their beliefs obviously won't make it, a harem of nude girls fall from the sky and onto their cocks, but it will affect the way that they go about their lives and therefore make their chances of getting laid higher or lower. But then again, it comes back to the same problem. So now you know that your beliefs affect the way you live your life. So now you can choose what beliefs to have to live a better life, right? Kind of. The truth is that your beliefs will constantly be reaffirmed, or whatever the opposite of reaffirm is, I guess decreased, by your own actions and to some extent by external reality. For instance, if you believe that you're someone who does a lot of sports and stays fit, but one morning you wake up and you just don't make room and you just sit in bed and have a pint of ice cream and watch The Sopranos, then that will decrease by a small amount your belief that you're someone who's fit. As long as this happens every once in a while, then it's fine. But once you repeat the actions that go against your beliefs, then your beliefs will sort of start to reverse and change. You have one cigarette at a party, and you're not someone who smokes cigarettes, but you do it enough times, and then you slowly become someone who smokes cigarettes. The trick is to repeat the actions that reaffirm the beliefs that you want to have. Um, and I don't want to get too into this because it's a whole nother topic. But if you're interested, I recommend a book called Atomic Habits. I can't remember who it's by. I'll leave it in the description. But that one's all about habit formation and sort of the best way to create habits that will reaffirm your beliefs and turn you into a person that you want to be. Anyway, if you're still wondering if free will exists or not, I'd say that the answer is probably that, well, on the most basic level of reality, there isn't. But on the level of which you experience reality, there is. So, don't give up hope and keep trying to do your best. Just remember that whether or not you're going to do your best has already been determined.